Hello, and welcome to Adult Bible Studies. I thought this might be a good time for me to kind of go back and recap a little bit about this series of Bible studies and how it all began and what's our intent here. I see this time of Bible study as a ministry of our church, Bluff Park United Methodist Church in Hoover, Alabama. It's built around the lesson material that is published by Cokesbury, and we're looking through their adult Bible studies series of lessons. Uh, right now, we're going through a unit that is designed to be for September, October, and November of this year. In this unit of lessons, we have seen we kind of got getting back to the basics, and we've seen how in the first September lessons, we focused on food and how food is often used as a means of fellowship, and a means of God showing His love and grace, and for us to be reminded of His sustaining power. Likewise, this unit of lessons for October takes that and uses the emphasis on water. Water, of course, being one of those fundamental sort of things. And then next month, we'll look at shelter. Food, water, and shelter, some of the basic things that we all need, and that we see that God in His wisdom and in His love and in His grace provides us these basics so that we can have a relationship with Him and not be so tangled up in just the survival mode of life that we don't have that time and energy and focus to be able to spend time with Him. It enhances our relationship with Him. This series of lessons was begun a couple of years ago when COVID was raging and people weren't able to come to Sunday school. We started doing this to provide a Sunday school lesson available to those who weren't able to come to church. What we discovered is that now that COVID is less of a threat, and we've learned how to manage that a little bit better, and people are returning to Sunday school in person, there is still a good number of people who are unable to come to church. Maybe they're homebound, maybe their work limits prohibits them from being able to come for any number of reasons. They're just not able to come to church and be a part of a Sunday school class. And yet they still desire to be students of God's Word and want to study His Word together. And so we're continuing, or I'm continuing, this series of lessons through Cokesbury. And I don't want to take any credit for the substance of these lessons. Cokesbury edits these very well, and the writers are very gifted people who are blessed by God with their calling of writing. And I'm blessed by their sharing their wisdom and insights with me. And so just want to help you to understand a little bit about how this came about and what it's all about. Well, as I said, this month we're looking at lessons that have some kind of focus on water. Last week we looked at how Hagar had been sent away from Abraham and Sarah, and she was in the desert, and she was to the point of feeling like she was helpless and hopeless and had abandoned hope. And God opened her eyes and provided for her the things that she needed to survive that situation. This week we're going back to a similar situation that we looked at in the very first lesson of this unit, where we saw the Jewish people after they had gotten out of Egypt in slavery, while they were traveling, before they ever first came to Mount Sinai, while they were traveling, and their first provisional needs were the needs for food, and God provided quail and manna, and that satisfied that need. That's chapter 16 of Exodus. Today we're going to look from chapter 17, and it's just kind of the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would say. They've got the food thing taken care of, and now it's a water thing. There are three different episodes in the Old Testament that focus on God's provision of water to these people while they were traveling through the desert and on their 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. The first one is back in chapter 15 of Exodus, and the people come there to a body of water but the water is tainted. It's bitter, and they're not able to consume it. And so there's an outcry that, here's water, but we can't use it. God gives Moses the instruction of a special kind of tree that they can take and cut and put in the water. And when they do that, it whatever it does by chemical action or whatever, it takes that wang out of the water so that they can enjoy it. It's sweet water again. They're able to survive. From that point, they move on, and that's where we take up today in chapter 17. They're still headed toward Mount Sinai. They haven't made it to Mount Sinai yet, and so they haven't got the Ten Commandments. They don't have a lot of those things that we identify with the nation Israel. In fact, what we have is a little ragtag group of people who've spent all of their lives in slavery and who really don't have much of a self identity, and certainly don't have much of an identity with God, because in slavery they weren't able to worship as they had worshipped when they were on their own. They weren't able to enjoy their festival days. The rabbis were limited in the things they could do, and their relationship with God has gotten cold and gotten to where it's lost a lot of its symbolism and connection and reminders about God and His love and grace. And so these people are following Moses. They have seen Moses perform the plagues that made Pharaoh finally give in to letting them leave Egypt. They, by his leadership, they've been able to be sustained. And Moses has been very clear every time he's done something like this that it was not him. He was just the conduit through which God's power was coming. He was just the person through whom God was able to express His grace and mercy to these people. And yet, because their relationship with God is still in such an infancy kind of stage, they have that uncertainty. They don't have that stability of a history of relationship with God. They've lost that. And because of that, it takes a lot of reminding. The title of today's lesson is How Many Miracles? How many miracles does it take for God to prove Himself to these people? How many times will He need to do something to assure them that He's with them? Well, today we're looking at one of those times when they reach that point where they're saying, we're not sure that we should have left Egypt. While we were slaves there and we didn't have freedoms to come and go and do the things that we wanted to do, there were still some good things about that because we had others who provided for us. And that provision by someone else is a part of the problem. They've learned to trust others rather than trust in themselves. And when we lose that sense of self, when we lose that sense of what we can do with God's help and what God calls us to do and what God empowers us to do, we lose something very important. And that's what these people have lost. Listen as we just read through chapter 17, verses 1 through 7. The whole Israelite community broke camp and set out from the Sin desert to continue their journey. Now, that's where the water was tainted and they were able to clear it up so they could drink. They're moving away from that spot, still headed towards Mount Sinai, the place where God has promised to Moses that he would take the people and they would worship there. As the Lord had commanded, they set up their camp in Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. The people argued with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." You can see the animosity here. You can see the lack of trust. You can see, even though Moses has been the instrument of God's performing many marvelous acts for these people, there's still that uncertainty. There's still that sense of that you get as a slave where you're being forced to do this, but because you're doing that, you're going to be provided shelter and basic foods and basic needs. And so there's still that sense of I'm dependent. And out of that dependency comes an arrogance of I deserve this. I'm entitled to this. And they're still into that slave kind of mentality. And so they come to Moses and they get pretty heated here. I can see one of those town hall meetings where the people of the community are really upset about one thing or another, and the community leaders are trying to present a plan to resolve the situation, but the people maybe don't agree with it. And so people are getting up and saying some pretty hard things and saying them pretty harshly. And that's the way the people are responding to Moses here. Moses said to them, "Why are you arguing with me? Why are you testing the Lord?" This is a very similar comment to what he made back when they were asking about the provision of things to eat, the manna and the quail being provided at that time. Then Moses says, "I'm not the one who can do this. You don't come to me, don't be dependent on me. Realize that I am as dependent as you are upon God to provide me the basic tools that we need to satisfy these things. It's the Lord that you are arguing with. And when you start arguing with God, be careful, because you're getting off track from the very beginning. God is love. God is trustworthy. God is just. These people don't know that as you and I know it today. And so they don't have some of that basic sort of sense. Instead, they just feel helpless. It says, but the people were very thirsty for water there, and they complained to Moses. Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to kill us, our children, and our livestock with thirst? See, you get focused on something, a negative situation, and you can't see any possibilities. You stop even trying to do problem solving. You're just focused on complaining and how bad it is. Ain't it awful? Over and over again. Ain't it awful? Ain't it awful? And yet, there's not taking that step back and saying, yes, this is a bad situation, but here's some things I can do in this situation. These people were people of the desert. These people were people who lived in a land that didn't provide running water and sewage and all these sorts of things like we have in our communities these days. They knew how to do a lot of basic things, and yet they're just coming all to pieces because at this point they were indeed experiencing some pretty severe thirst. And that's one of the basic needs that we all have. And certainly it's one of those things that shakes you to your core. And so they were getting pretty arrogant and pretty aggressive with Moses. At this point, Moses enters into a dialogue with God. The Lord said to Moses, "Go on ahead of the people and take some of the Israel's elders with you. Take in your hand the shepherd's rod that you used to strike the Nile River, and go. I'll be standing there in front of you on the rock at Horeb. Hit the rock, water will come out of it, and the people will be able to drink." Moses did so while Israel's elders watched. The place, he called the place Massa and Meribah, because the Israelites argued with and tested the Lord, asking, "Is the Lord really with us or not?" There's a lot to this little section here, and we don't have time to talk about every bit of it, but at the same time, we want to see here Moses does what Moses can do because he is a person of faith. He goes to God and he says, "Father, look what's going on here. Help me with this. I'm acknowledging that I can't do what needs to be done." And God steps in and says, "No, Moses, I didn't expect you to be able to do this. I have a plan. And here's my plan." He tells him to take the rod that he's used, the shepherd's rod that he's used as a symbol of his office and of his authority, and that he used in performing several of the acts in Egypt that finally broke Pharaoh's will and allowed him to release the people to travel. And this is a time when, because Moses' authority, Moses' leadership had been so directly questioned, even to the point that the people were saying some things that were very threatening to him. He was scared. He was, he really felt the impact of their anger. Because of that, God sets it up in such a way that Moses can be highlighted in a little bit with this too. The power and the authority is coming from God, yes, but he's clearly authenticating Moses as his leader and his chosen person to lead the people. And he tells him to take the elders with him so that this won't be some act that's performed in private where no one can observe and see God's power. God is present at the stone. Moses performs the act that he's been called upon to do, and water comes out, and the people are satisfied. And that water provides a source for sustaining them for several years because they travel from where they are at the point of this passage on to Mount Sinai, and there is this stream of water that provides them for several years. We think maybe they stayed there at Mount Sinai for as long as 4 years while Moses went up onto the mountaintop, received the Ten Commandments, received all the instructions and guidance about worship practices and how to build the tabernacle and all those things. This became an encampment for them where they stayed for a long time. And God's provision of those basic things is a part of what solidifies and sustains this community. In our world, God tells us, I have given you the resources. I've given you the means. Share. Don't use them just for yourself. Don't hoard them, but share them. Let those be a conduit like Moses and let those things pass through to other people so that others can be blessed and see God's wisdom and power and majesty as well. We live in a world where one of the lesson writers said it was over 3 billion people on the face of our earth deal with water insecurity. Today, I mean, we can go into the bathroom or into the kitchen and turn on the tap, and instantly there's fresh, clean water that you can consume and use for any number of different things. And you just flip it on, flip it off, flip it on, flip it off. And with the rare exception of the lines being worked on or something like that, it's readily available. It's been that way all my life. Now, I grew up in a home where we had a well, and the pump tended to fail more than the city system does. But nonetheless, even when the pump failed, we were able to continue getting the water we needed while the repairs were made, and we survived. It never became an issue of survival for us. And so it's kind of hard for us to imagine that. We had a group come and speak to us at church not too long ago about their ministry of going into these third world countries and digging wells. You think, digging a well? That doesn't sound like very much. But when you're thirsty and when you're in need, water is such a wonderful gift. And it's such a constant reminder of God's love and grace. God has given us a world that provides for us everything we need. He asks us to use it wisely. He asks us to be good stewards of it. And he asks us to share. Is God really with us in this? Yes, he is. And he's with us by providing us the means to reach out to one another. I may have water. You may have fruits and vegetables. Together we share. Together we know. Some of the biggest confrontations that we have as human beings with one another is over these resources that are readily available from God himself and yet are not being shared. Forgive us, Father, for our greediness and for our lack of focus on you as the true source of all good and trustworthy things, and of your willingness to meet those basic needs. And along with that, to empower us to see that we can work with you and provide things for ourselves as well, utilizing those gifts. God calls us not just to be slaves and to be dependent, but to be independent, in that we can trust Him for those basic resources that we need. And because of that, we can grow and be the people that He created us to be. May our church be able to continue in ministry that reaches the lives of those in our community in need. May we, as a group of believers, be able to reach beyond our own personal homes and our own immediate community and share those abundant resources that we have with others. And may God be given the glory in all things. Have a great week. Amen.